Hi there, my name is Kate. Welcome back to my channel. Thanks for stopping by. Today is the second part of the Afterthought heel tutorial that goes with my pattern. In the first one, we looked at how to add the thread that will mark the place for your Afterthought heel and kind of hold that gap. And now we're looking at picking up the stitches. Because there's so many stitches, I've already gone ahead and got started. I have about half of the, or 1/4 of the stitches left, so 1/2 of one side left to do. So what I use to do this is a circular needle that is a size or two in this case, smaller than what I knit with. Just makes it a little easier to pick up the stitches. They're just going to hold it, and then I'm going to start knitting again with the same size that I knit the rest of it so that the gauge is the same. What you can see here is that I have one loop picked up for each of the stitches, and you can still see the white thread that's still in there, which is the thread we added before, which is kind of holding my gap. And what I'm going to do now is finish picking up the rest of the stitches here. So what you want to do is remember that a knit stitch is made up of a V. There are two sections of each knit stitch, and what you want to do is pick up one of those legs. So I am here at this blue stitch here, and I don't know whether this is going to focus properly or not, but you can see there are two legs to this stitch. I usually try to pick up the same leg of each stitch all the way along. It makes it a little easier to see and a little easier to work with, and then your stitches are either all twisted or all not twisted on the needle. So I'm picking up this near leg on that stitch, and then we're onto this white one, picking up the near leg, onto this blue one, picking up the near leg, picking up the near leg, and you can see I'm not straying from, I'm not picking up these white ones, but I'm also not getting too far up. You want the ones that are attached to the white, because we're going to pull the white out, but you don't want to pick up the white. So there's the next one, the two legs of this one, pick that up. Just trying to see if, don't think that actually is helping, but pick that up. Then we have another nice dark blue one. We're just picking up for each little stitch one of the legs. Another one and another one and another one. I'm just gonna see if maybe not having the light quite as bright on it, whether that helps. So you can see this next white stitch, there's one leg, there's the other one. I want to pick up that leg. And then we skip over one, and I'm picking up this leg, over its other one, we're onto the next stitch, pick up that leg. It doesn't matter really which leg you pick up. I'm sure there's a right one and a wrong one, but honestly it doesn't matter. Just get them all on there, because you're going to still do a round to fix all of your stitches up. So then there's that one, then that one, then this guy. Try not to split them as you pick them up, so if you've got multiple plies in there, as you most likely will with a fingering or a DK weight yarn, just try not to split the plies. A really pointy needle helps, and one that's also where them being a little smaller helps. It just makes it easier to get it into that space. So pick that one up, and then this one, and this one, this one, that one. We're starting to get to the end here. This one, and that should be that's the last one that has any white in it, so I'm going to pull those. Alright, so now we've got all the stitches picked up, one side and the other. So I've got both sides here. So basically I now have everything picked up, and the only thing that's in the middle is that white yarn. What I usually use is a little crochet hook or another needle. This is a little DPN that I use for socks. So what we do next is we pull out the white yarn. So this is why you need to make sure that you have all of those other stitches trapped. So we're just gonna grab that white yarn from the back, this scrap yarn that we have, and we're gonna start pulling it out. And again, we can use those loops to help us do it. There's one loop. In this case, I would pull both legs because it's easier than trying to yank everything through and then ending up tightening something. So I just loosen it up a little bit with the needle, and then I use my fingers to do it. So let's try adjusting the light a little bit. So if you can see right here, one stitch, and then there's this stuff in the middle. We want to get rid of that. So we just lift it up a little bit, pull it out. And we're going to do this all the way across. So it's going to take a while, so just bear with me. Oh, I pulled two there. I'm sure there is a faster way, so if somebody wants to share that with me, or not, but I do think this is one of those things where if you just take your time, it's nice and easy. It's not super hard to do. You just give it the time, pay attention to what you're doing, and it'll all come together. So yeah, so this is a lot of me just picking out these stitches, and then once these are out, we'll knit the first round, and I'll show you how to just make sure all of those stitches that are now loops on the needle are taken care of, especially on, as you can see, we're starting to get some funky stuff happening here, and that's because of the floats. They're carried in the back. Suddenly we've taken out the thing that was keeping them in place, so we're going to have to handle those just a little bit special when we go through. They're not super hard to deal with, but they will pop up a little bit, so just take your time so you don't end up, especially in this case, I probably could have picked a darker, see how that float here is trapped under this yarn? But we need to get rid of this yarn, so we're releasing that float. So we're just going to have to trap it back up again and make that all work when we go back around. So just be careful as you go. You probably a good tip to have slightly higher contrast between your working yarns and your scrap yarn. My background color is pretty close to this white, so while I look at it in person, it's not too bad, and even on screen you can see a little bit of the sort of off-white natural kind of color there versus this stark white. It is a little bit finicky, so you might want to find something that's really different from what you're working with. I happen to have some white acrylic sitting in the corner of my craft room, so I just went with that. This is also the second time I've used this piece because I knew it fit, so that might also be something to keep in mind. Where you're pulling on it, you might actually find that you are going to damage that yarn and make it a little more difficult to work with if you do it too many times. But now that we've got a bigger opening, as you can see, it's going a bit faster. And for anybody who's sewn before, this is unfortunately a fairly identifiable task of basically ripping out a seam. I'm just finding one stitch and removing it and going and getting the next one, and we're gonna make it through. So there, I said it was going quickly, and now I've slowed down. And again, when you're knitting this up, it's a good idea to be extra careful not to split a ply on your holding yarn, on your scrap yarn, because you need to pull it out. So if you split the ply and knitted it with one of the stitches in the next one, you're going to run into some challenges, and you might even have to cut it to get it out. In this case, it's gotten floofy because I've pulled it a few times, so I'm catching both sides of a loop or something and just not pulling them through well. But it's coming along. We're almost halfway there. Pull the two of them apart a little bit, and there's that white. Pull them apart, and the white. The super exciting world of Afterthought heels. You can see when we get to the middle, everything's a bit looser and a bit wonkier. That is partially because we have these little tails. because we were knitting in the round and this was the center of where we were operating, our yarn got cut before we did our Afterthought heel right there, and it got rejoined at the top, also in that middle place, instead of at one of the corners. So that middle is a bit wonky. Just be careful when you're picking it up that you pull up the right stitch. You may have to look a little closer just to see which pieces are tying into the white, into your scrap yarn, because yours may not be white. The first time when I was getting ready for this, the yarn that I had, the side that I had already picked up when we started, that I had to take back a bunch because I had gotten started at that halfway point a row up. So I wasn't picking up the loops from the right row. So it happens, but just pull the needle out and start over again. And then, okay, let's pull these guys forward a bit to give ourselves a little bit more room to work with. If you get tired of pulling it the long way, you can always come to this end. Again, pull it out. And then just pull from one end. But I think it was, yeah, I had a nice long tail already in there. So, keep going. Doesn't matter what side you pull it from. You just basically want to get this out, and you want to have all your stitches on safely on needles. That's why I like using the circular needles as well. The one set, they're nicely secured there. And when I know I've got both tips right here, I know nothing has fallen off. If you're not planning to reuse your scrap yarn, you can always cut it to make yourself a smaller tail to make pulling these out easier. I may try and get one more out of it. I will probably regret that the next time, but we're actually going to cut this one because now it's getting on my nerves. Just, there we go. Get rid of that. This is really purely scrap. There's nothing you're going to need it for again later, unless, again, you want to use the same scrap piece of yarn over and over again for something. So it does not hurt anything if you cut it. I would not try and cut the seam open. Particularly in a normal Afterthought heel, you might be able to. This one, where you've got your floats trapped, I would definitely not try cutting it open. You are way more likely to cut a float than you would be if you were perhaps brave enough to risk it without in an Afterthought heel that doesn't have any floats. We are almost to the end here, I promise. This is super exciting watching me pick out stitches. Like I said, it is a time-consuming thing. It's not hard. It just takes a little bit of time and patience and paying attention to what you're pulling on. Alrighty. There we go. So let's pull that last bit out. Alrighty. Ta-da! So now we have an opening in our yarn that is half of the stitches wide, so it's the same number of stitches around. So we were using whatever number of stitches we were using around the top, we are now using here, and we now have this big opening. We are going to do exactly what we did for the toe for the heel, except we're not going to give it the extra length that we give it in the toe. So what I'm going to do now is grab my two yarns again. There are those two. I am going to work, I'm actually going to just start up again with I'm just going to go straight into the preparation for the braid at this point. So we're going to have both yarns in here right now. So just grab them, toss them inside for a tail, and we'll get them started. What you may want to do when you're here, so if I'm looking at this, oh, we've got a little stitchy who is gotten lost right here, so we're going to pick that one up. We don't want to lose anything. So that's something to keep in mind. Depending on how you pull it out, if you gauged it wrong, you might have one at either end you need to just rescue. They're fine on that end. There's no loose guys there. But there is a bit of a gap. So what you might choose to do when you get there is look at your stitches and maybe pick up something from down here and just knit it together with one of the stitches on the needle. We don't need extra stitches, so we're not trying to pick it up, and we don't need to keep knitting them. We're not worried about fit, and if the heel's a little tight or whatever, it's not going on anybody's feet. So what we just want to do is pick stuff up and start going. So I am going to try and tighten this up a little bit by just picking this guy up, and I'm going to knit them together with that one. And again, you may even choose to twist or untwist stitches right here just to tighten things up a little bit. The other thing you can do is you're going to have some tails in the back when all is said and done, so you may want to also use those for doing some tightening. So there's my first stitch in. I'm going to need you. I am much more comfortable, because I'm right-handed, doing the setup rows for these things with my right hand, but I will switch back to doing one in each hand in a second. So what we want to look at is, what did we have? Okay, there we go. So here's a stitch. Now what we have here, if we look, see how we don't have the right number of stitches if we only take that one? That is because of our friends, the floats. So what we're going to need to do is go, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. That should work. Okay. So we actually need this guy right here. It doesn't look like a stitch because it's just kind of hanging around, but it is a stitch. So we're going to work it together with this here. And this is the one part that's going to get a bit wonky, and this is different if you're just looking at this because you came across this video for Afterthought heel. Normal Afterthought heel made with the same yarn is not going to cause this problem. This is specific to the fact that we have stranded patterns going on beforehand. So we're going to cope with it, and we're going to keep going. So, oh, there we go. We ended up knitting that with the right hand, so we're just going to grab this, pull it. Okay. Now you see we've got another one of these. This float is coming from somewhere, so where's our white yarn? We're just going to do that. Now our float is taken care of. Now we're back to these 3 stitches, which are not impacted by anything because the float is going behind them. We're just going to do this. And then we have that and that. And you're really going to notice it because you're going to see this piece that acts weird on front. So this is where we know we have a float we need to catch. So this is a float that should be over here and behind. So we're going to catch it. Now it's back where it belongs. This, same thing. Here we go again. This weird bit in the front that actually means that this should be secured from behind. So we are going to go ahead and do it. And this is the setup row for the braid that goes around, which is why I'm knitting one of each color and alternating. This is the setup row for the braid that will go around the edge. So we're just doing those 2 things at the same time. So there we go. There's that other one where the float is in front instead of in behind where it belongs. So we flip it over, and then I'm just knitting through the back again, just to pin it back to where it belongs. There's some of this bear color. There we go, we're all fine. There we go. Yet again, wonkiness. And so far it seems mostly in this row that the floats that we carried were with the blue yarn. So they're the ones that seem to be showing up for the most part, though we did have one at the very beginning that was white. So here we go. So that is 1/4 of the back. We've reached that center point, so we're gonna retuck those guys in. So we want to make sure our tails from our previous row are tucked in, but that they're not over top of the yarn we're working with. So yarn I'm working with out of the way, tails tucked inside. And then I'm just gonna kind of give my needle that is the one I'm not working with, the one that's just holding the stitches, a little bit of tug, so that I can keep going. So here you will see we've got our tails, so we're just going to tug them a little bit out of the way. Come on. To make sure that that goes where it belongs. And that is not a wonky float, that is just the tail that has ended up in front. So we might have to move these around a little bit just to get the tail to pull in behind where we want it and not be pulled in front. So I'm just going to pull that tail through because I don't want it over the stitches from that row, because I still need those stitches for the pattern, but I did want to just get them out of the way. So those guys are there. So here we have, looks like we need, it looks like we're missing somebody here. Okay, because this is a stitch. So when in doubt, make one. It's not going to hurt anything, and we'll figure it out. So there's one. We're going to do two. And again, then we tug back here and go, what did we do? Do these all make sense? Are they all working? Are they in back where they belong? Yeah, they look good. So then we go, what have we got going on here? I'm just going to do this. It looks like this should be something. Or maybe this should be something. Yeah, we're going to go with that should be something. And because it's the tail, it's going to be extra twisty, so I'm just going to wrap it around there. If you have the foresight to arrange your needle points in the right way, you can do this row, which is the top if you're working the chart, if that makes sense, because we're working from the cuff down. So it's the top of where the chart is, but so that you get some practice with it before you get to this point, just with the normal stuff. So there we go. Here's our wonky float guy. We're gonna flip him in back. That section just got a little bit wonky, essentially because the tails were there, which meant the stitches were not as easily secured as where they normally are. So we just do this, and we keep going. See, so throwing with one hand, picking with the other, and these floats, just capturing them from the back so that they will keep the floats where they belong. So again, here's one where we've got this strange little guy, but we're also, because I must have caught floats close to each other, we're also getting a white float that's impacted. So if we do this guy, then we see he actually pulled the white one that was also towards the front back. So that will help with things. We just want to keep all the floats where they belong, and when they're back where they belong, the front of the work just falls into order. So don't panic too much, because as you see, like here would be another one we'd have to pick up, but when I pull this blue behind, it'll pull the white behind with it. In this case, we are actually getting pretty close to a corner. So what I'm going to do is just pop that guy off. I'm going to pull this so that my needle tip is want it. And since I'm at the edge, I'm gonna take a look right here at just how big is this space, and what do I maybe want to do to tighten it up a little bit. So there's my 2 working yarns. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm actually going to twist this guy, just because that will help close up some of the space. And you know what? I'm going to grab this, and I'm also going to twist it. And then I'm going to knit those 2 together. That will help just kind of close up that gap that's appeared. So there we go. So that's going to help close that gap up, and I can do something like that on both sides. So I'm probably going to grab, let's grab this guy and pop it there. Again, maybe twist that around. And by knitting these 2 together, that one's a bit tight and is fighting me. So by knitting those 2 together, again, now I've got this much more closed off. Again, it's the corner of the heel of a stocking. It's probably not going to be the most noticeable thing in your knitting, but between doing this and then with any scrap yarn or tails that you have, you can tidy it up as well further from the inside. When you sew those off, it just makes it a little bit nicer. So now on this side, you can see, guess what? We have no more float problems. So this is the easy side to start on if you're doing this, to get a hang of just picking it up from the inside, but it is a lot easier to knit the rest of this because there isn't going to be anything funny. It's just knitting it, and in this case, I picked the wrong loop, so these are all backwards on the needle, so I just have to knit them the right way. So right now, as you can see, the front, the second leg is in front on the needle. Way we normally want to orient a knit stitch is like that. So I could go through the hassle of flipping them all over, or I can just knit them behind instead of knitting them in front, and it will do the same thing. It reorients those. So if that's not something that you've ever done before, or you're looking at that going, this is really uncomfortable, that is one way to handle this problem. If this is what you also do, I would, rather than racking your head trying to figure out if you're picking them up upside down, which leg you need, I would just do this. It's easy. It's a good thing to be able to do when you're with your knitting, to if you come across a stitch that is on the needle wrong, just how to knit it out. Or you could, if that's really confusing, you're messing with your head, just slip them one way and then slip them back. So this is a little bit slower just because this is not how my fingers want to operate, but it is coming together nicely. And obviously much faster because we're really not worrying about all of those things that we had to on the other side with the floats and with the little bit of weirdness that happened right where the tails were. The big thing is just making sure that you picked up all of the plies, that you didn't split the yarn when you were either picking them up or when you're knitting them, so that everything stays nice and neat. We're about to get to the center here, because I can feel those tails coming up. So in this case, shouldn't cause a lot of problem, but you may just want to give it a tug to tighten that stitch back up. And then when you are knitting, what I'll actually do, I'm going to do the next one, because that's where the other tail was. And then I'm going to show you how I use basically the same technique as what we're doing for the stranded knitting with carrying it. And I'm going to show you how we can do that and trap the yarn. So there's the one I'm knitting like that. And then I'm going to trap those guys there. But, oops, we don't want this guy in front. We need that guy in back. We're going to trap those guys. And then we're going to knit. And we're going to knit and see how they're now going to be trapped by the blue the second time. I'm not going to try and trap them under both yarns. I'll figure out whichever yarn, and probably the one that's in the same, not the one that's in the same hand. So there that goes, whoops, and there I split that ply. So we do this, and then we go through here. Just keep that one to the back where it normally belongs, put these two up top as if we were going to knit with this hand with them, and instead we just put them there, wrap this one around. That's going to trap that. Skip a stitch, doing it with the other color, and then see how they're still held over this yarn. Next time I knit with that yarn, it just traps them, and I can do this all the way along for, you know, an inch or two, and that will trap these tails inside, and then they're done. I can just trim them off. I don't need to worry about them once my project is done. When the yarn does get twisted a little bit, it can, and especially when you've unpicked that center row, they can get a bit kind of iffy there, and in this case they're a bit splitty between being spun and having been twisted a little bit. So just be nice to them and take your time, and they will all come together. Again, just those are just gonna wrap over. And my fingers, my brain knows that I can't do that I can't knit them normally, but my fingers keep wanting to. And trap these one more time. So now those are nicely trapped. I'm not going to fuss with them anymore. I will just keep going with the two colors I have, and I'm getting to the point here where my needles are starting to tangle up in each other, so it's good that we're almost done here. So we're up to our last couple of stitches, and so we are here at the end of the row, and again, let's get the scrap yarn out of the way. What I'm going to do is I'm actually just going to slip that stitch over so I can get this extra needle out of the way as well. Alright, so we're back to where we started when we were working the leg. We have all of the stitches on these two needles, both colors. Ta-da! So we have one more stitch that we need to attend to, but I'm probably going to pick up one from down here just to tighten that up a little bit. So we're going to take this one, we're going to twist it, and we're going to knit those two together. There we go. Alrighty, so now we've kind of tightened it up. I've also got two tails here that when I go to sew them in, I'll take a look at how that gap is once I finish knitting, and if I need to, I'll tighten that up a little bit from there. So we're just going to tuck those inside, and now you can see there are all of your stitches back working around. In this case, we've picked them all up with alternating one color and then the other for knitting it. So that is picking up the stitches for the Afterthought heel, and then from there we're going to work the braid and then just work the heel as per the instructions. The complicated part really is picking up the stitches. So that is all done now. I hope that was helpful to you and not too boring as you watch me pick out stitches for like 15 minutes. If you have any questions or any comments, please leave them below, and thanks so much for joining me.